basic object orientation concepts. I'm going to use PHP just because it happens to be a language that I know well, but these types of concepts exist in pretty much most other languages that you see today, except for JavaScript, because what I'm going to be showing you is class-based object orientation, and JavaScript uses functional-based object orientation, so it's a little bit different. So we're going to use class-based object orientation. So for starters, we have a PHP file here, index.php, and you can see that I have the beginnings and the endings of our PHP code, so the code's going to live in the middle. And I'm going to actually get rid of this last part because it's not required. So I just wanted to show you that because if you see someone else's code and it's not there, that is not a mistake. It's probably done on purpose, and you can read articles about why that is that we do that sometimes. So let's start off by making a class. Let's call it user. So to make a class, you say class, and then you say what the class name is, and then you start your opening and closing curlies. Okay, so from here, you want to think of classes as being kind of like making a template for your objects. Okay, so we're going to then, later on, we're going to make, let's say, a new user. So let's say it's me. Let's say it's a variable called Brad equals new user. Okay, so this is pretty much the very beginnings of using a few things, using the new keyword. That new keyword instantiates all the code that's inside of here and makes an object and puts it inside of whatever is right here to the left of our equal sign. Okay, so for starters, we probably want to make what's called a constructor. So let me make this and then I'll dissect each of the parts. Okay, so what I've just made is a public constructor, and I'm going to explain what the public keyword means actually in just a few minutes, but before we get to that, I just wanted to explain what some of these other parts are. So we're making a function inside of the user class. Anytime we have functions inside of a class, or rather inside of an object, you can say either one of those that way and it's fine. We don't refer to it as a function anymore so much as we probably want to refer to it as a method. So what happens here is this constructor method, and these double underscores are significant because in PHP the way that we make our constructor is by doing an underscore, underscore, and then the word construct. And what happens here is anytime we do a user and we say this variable right here equals a new user, as we call new user, it's really going to call the constructor first, and that's going to construct our object for us. So let's run this code, and I'm going to save it and run out to the browser real quick. And here we have hi from constructor. Okay, so if I were to go back and let's pass in, let's say, a message, we might say hi from message, and then I can pass in a message right here, like let's say it's my name as a string. And notice if I make a few of these various objects, oops, sorry. Notice as I make a few of these, each one is going to be an object, Brad, John, and Tom. And each one is passing in a string that's going to end up right here in the message variable, and then it's going to echo hi from message. And you know what, I should probably put a break line in here just because we want each of the messages to show up on its own line. Oh, and I forgot a space after the word from, so I'll just go back and fix that real quick. Put a space right here. Okay, so that's what we get. Okay, so now back into the code. Let's erase this little example right here, but I'm going to keep my constructor going. I'm actually just going to leave it blank for right now, but what I wanted to do is make another method inside of here, and I actually want to kind of just go back to making just simply one user, and we're going to make another method, and we're going to call this one, how about we'll call it get age. Yeah, that's something good. Okay, so we'll call it get age. And then maybe for our constructor, we'll pass in the age of the person that we're making. And so right here, we have the age variable, right? If I were to do echo age, I would get the age, except we're not exactly assigning this value to our object so much as this variable just lives in memory just for one small moment while this constructor is running, but after the constructor runs, any of these variables that are locally scoped to this constructor are not going to exist anymore. Okay, so we actually need to assign it to, let's say, a variable that is up here. So if we do public age, and we'll start this off with like a default value, now we can say this age equals age, like that. And so this keyword refers to the overall class or the overall object. Okay, so it's like this special reserved word that refers to everything. So we made a public member, or in other words, a public variable inside of the user class, and it's called age. And so by saying this age, we're actually referring to this guy right here. And then right here, we're assigning what gets passed into the constructor. And then over here for get age, I'm going to echo this age. Okay, so then when we make our user Brad, I'm going to pass in a number here, and we will save this. So here's what's going to happen. When the code runs, it sees that we want to make a class, but having a class exists like that doesn't really do anything until it gets instantiated. So really the instantiation part happens right here where we say new user 31. Okay, so 31 gets passed into the constructor right there, which gets passed along to this age, which means this right here essentially becomes 31. And then what I can do is I can do Brad get age like this, and calling this method of this object will output 31 because here's the method, and that's going to basically go and get this age, which is 31. Okay, so I'm going to reset this to be 0. In fact, we don't have to set it to be 0. We can just set it up as a variable like that. Okay, so I save this. We're going to run it now. Okay, so we get 31. And just to kind of show you that that's coming from inside of here, I'll say age is going to be 31, and we get that. Okay, so I want to show you a few things that are going on here. So for starters, we have, you might say that our class has two methods. One of them is the constructor, and so again we do this with underscore construct, and that's like a reserved word. But this other one here, we got to make up whatever we wanted for that. Okay, so you get to make up most of your method names as long as they're not reserved words. Okay, so you might notice too that these methods are public, and also this member variable up here is public. Let me show you what happens when we make this private, which is one of the other options. We get a fatal error because we're trying to call a private method, user get age, from a context that is not allowed to ask for that method. So here's what's going on. When you make functions or methods inside of your class and they are public like this, they can be accessed from the outside world. In other words, out here where we make our Brad object, we can get to any method or member that is public. But anything that is private can only be accessed from within here. let me give you an example of something that might be private. Let's say that there's another variable called password. And let's just say for a moment that when this constructor happens, one of the things that it does is it figures out what the password is for this user. And for now, I'm just going to type in a bunch of gibberish, but let's just kind of go with this example. And so password, notice, is private. So what we can do, and you know, I guess I should probably also mention that we didn't even need this this public get age method at all, because any of your members that are public, you can just get those directly without a function. So instead of calling get age like this, I could have just simply done this. I could have just said echo, and that would have outputted the age. And because it's public, I can get that. Okay, so our constructor sets it right here, and then we can get it like this. So this is how we access a member. If it had parentheses, it would be kind of suggesting that that is a method. But since it doesn't, it's a member, right? It's just a variable. So it's public, so we can save this and refresh, and I get 31. But again, if I were to change age to be private, we get that fatal error again. Okay, so if I change this back to be public, but notice that our password is private. So if we try accessing Brad's password from the outside, we can't get to it because it's private. Let's say that there's a method that's public, and it's get password. Okay, so it's called get password, and maybe it takes a hint variable, and if the hint variable is equal to get it, then we're going to return this password. Okay, so notice that inside of this object, we can refer to the password, which is private, and we can access it. And because we can access it, we can return it. Okay, but from out here, we couldn't do this. We couldn't echo Brad password like that. Okay, we would get that private, we would get that fatal error that says that we're trying to access something that's private. But what we can access is this new method called get password, which is public. And if we pass in just the right hint right here, I'm going to pass in something else that's not correct. So we're going to pass that in. This if statement is not going to happen. And we're going to get a message that says you don't have permission. Okay. Okay, so as we fire up this new user, 30 with the age of 31, we're then going to echo out, try to echo out his password. We're going to try to return it and echo it out. And here's what we're going to get. Oops, I got an unexpected error. Maybe you saw something before I did. Let's go and take a look at line 13. Oh, I forgot to do the word function. Okay, so maybe you saw that before I did. Sorry about that. Okay, so we don't have permission. Let's pass in the hint, which is get it, and refresh, and we get the password. Remember, the password was those scribbled words right there. So this is kind of a silly example, but in reality, usually where the class is right here is not necessarily in the same place where you instantiate it. Instead, what happens is you tend to have another file. So let's make another file real quick. I'm going to go here and make make a new file, and I'm going to call this user.php. Okay, so we have user.php. I'm going to copy all this over here and save it. And then right here, we're going to include user.php. Okay, so what we've done now is we're still going to access this index file, but it's including user.php. Anytime you do an include, that is basically exactly like going to this file, copying all the contents, and pasting it right here. Bam, and pasting it like that. Okay, so that's what an include does. But now we have the user class in its own file, so it can be used as like a resource for other pages. So, you know, maybe you have the type of architecture where you have some classes that might have some sensitive information or just things that you don't want to access from the outside. You would rather go through a method like this, and that is the kind of the doorway to get into your class in order to get into some of the private members, and that's fine. So that is what public and private does for you. There's lots of reasons why you might use it. Actually, I'm not going to get into all those reasons right now in this video because it's a very basic intro video, but I just want you to understand that those two concepts exist. And if you hear the word encapsulation, this is what they're talking about in object-oriented programming, the ability to encapsulate information inside of the class that only the class has access to. In other words, the private stuff. Okay, so anyways, that is a very basic intro so far. Let's see what we can do to spruce it up a little bit. I'm actually going to kind of trim it down. Okay, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of this whole password thing, and we're just going to kind of go back to here. Okay, so the next thing that I want to explain is actually called inheritance. And so let's imagine that we have a type of website that has users, and users are either going to be administrative users or they're going to be members of our website. Okay, so we have two different types of users in our system. We have admin and we have members. And let's just identify a couple things that they have. So admin are going to have names, and they're going to have emails. Okay, and let's just say that members are also going to have names and emails. But let's say that something unique to administrators is like their permission level. Let's just call it permission level. Like maybe it's like 1, 2, or 3 or something. Okay. And let's say with members, we're going to have their the time that they were added. Okay, so let's say that these are the things that we're going to keep track of for admin and members. What you might notice is that each of them has names and emails, and essentially both of them are types of users, right? So what if we what if we wanted to make an object for admin and we want to make an object for members? You might notice that we would be repeating a lot of our code inside each of these objects, because we would, all the logic for setting up an email and saving the names and stuff, that would be repeated here versus down here. Okay, so what if we made 3 objects, right? Like what if we made a user object that has the common information? Oops, that was a bad drag. Okay, so what if we make this kind of look like this? Okay, so we have a user object that has names and emails. The admin has the stuff that's just specific to it, which is like permission levels, and the member has date added. Okay, so let's set up that kind of situation. Notice we already have a user class up here, so I'm going to make a couple things. I'm going to make the name, and I'm going to make the email. And we have a very basic constructor. I'm just going to kind of get rid of some of this information here. I'm going to say this name equals name, which means I need to pass it in right here. And we're going to say this email equals email. Okay, so we have ourselves a basic user class. Okay, so we can use that out here. I'm actually going to comment this out so we still have it, but we're going to run over here, and we have our user class, and we're going to do, I'm just going to say user1 equals new user, and we're going to pass in Brad, and we're going to pass in Brad at azpixels.com. That's my email address. Okay, so now that we have that, let's also, you know what, let's have another thing. Let's have a thing called public type. And type is going to be whether or not you are an administrator or a member. Okay, so let's have that. So I'm going to have a public function get type. Okay, and this is going to return this type. Okay, so what we have going on here is a situation where we have a user. We haven't quite set up the admin and the member yet. You're going to see how I do that in a second. Oh, I need to have this, and I probably need to have this as well. And then over here, I'm going to pass in member. Okay, so we have user one. It's Brad. Here's his email address. He's a member. Let's echo user one, and let's get the type. Okay, so if I did all this correctly, I'm looking for an output that says what we passed in right here, member, because member gets passed into the third argument. Third argument is the type. Okay, so here we say this type equals type, so that goes up here, and then get type is going to return this type. Okay, so everything looks like it's good to go. Let's go out to the browser and refresh, and looks like I have another error. Maybe you saw this too, line 7. Looks like I forgot a semicolon right here. Okay, so we'll go back out here, refresh. Okay, so we get member. That's fine, except what I want to do then is make an admin class. And so let's make another class right below it. I know that this file is called user, but normally I would have my file be representative of just one class, but just for example purposes, I'm going to put both of these kind of together in one file. So I'm going to do class admin. Sorry about that. Okay, so here we have our admin, and let's copy all of this down here. Okay, so if we have this admin class, you can see that we can also set up our user to be an admin. We can do this. And we could pass in the name and the email, and I guess over here we would pass in admin, and then we could be like, okay, let's get the user one's type. But you see how we're repeating all the same code right here as we are for up here, right? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say class admin extends user. And I realize that Sublime Text Editor is kind of colorizing these funny. It's deciding that the class name here is white and this other class name that we're referring to is green. That's fine. It is correct because you can see that I do have it spelled correctly. And so what I'm going to do now is we're going to extend one class from the other. So what we've just done is set up a situation where if I leave this completely empty, the admin class is basically just as good as the user class. Okay, so it has all of this functionality inherently built in down here. I don't have to copy it down. The only thing I need to do is decide which things I want to be special just for admin. Okay, so we're actually going to copy these things down, but only because I'm going to kind of be lazy and use them to kind of paste and rewrite. So for the admin, you can see that we're going to have permission level. Okay, so imagine imagine this. We want to have permission levels, so we're going to do this. Permission level. I'm actually going to do it using camel case. Okay, so we have permission level. Notice we still have type, so we're going to pass in permission level, like that. But with this constructor, there's already been some work done where we set the name and the email and the type and all that stuff to be up here. We don't need to do that again. What we really need to do is to call our parents constructor. Okay, so if I have this right, this doesn't look right actually, but I'm going to go with it. I think it might be right. So this calls the parent constructor. The admin class, its parent, the thing that it extends, is the user. So that means we're going to be calling this constructor up here. And I'm not sure that this is right, but we're going to try it out. Okay, so we're going to call that with name, email, and type because that's what it takes. And then right here, we're going to say this permission level equals permission level. Okay, again, not sure if this is going to work because I think I'm doing something wrong here. I haven't written PHP in a handful of weeks, been mostly working on JavaScript. You know, let's just buzz over to Google and figure this out real quick. PHP parent constructor. Oh, okay, so it looks like I don't need the underscores. I thought that looked weird. Okay, so we're just going to get rid of those. Okay, so that should work. So now what we have going on is notice that we are with user 1, we're saying it's going to be a new admin, and we're passing in 1, 2, 3, and let's make us permission level 3, whatever that means, okay? And then we're going to do user 1 get type. Notice that get type, this method, it doesn't exist in the admin class exactly, okay? If you take a look over here, get type doesn't exist right here. So here's what happens. Anything that doesn't exist right here, it looks up here to see if it exists because admin extends user, you see, and because of the user class has public function get type, it will just kind of bounce up to this one instead of using one down here. Now, had we made one down here instead, maybe I'll just show you this. We'll make one right here, get type, and this will return hello world or something like that. Okay, so we're making a new admin user, and we're going to say user1 get type. So over here, it's going to call this get type, and hopefully it'll say hello world if everything worked out correctly. Okay, so we get hello world. But then notice if we get rid of this, it'll still run, and we'll get admin. And that's because now that it doesn't exist right here, it calls up to this one. And this one gets this type, which it got from right here, which it got from right here, which remember down here, this constructor called up to the parents constructor. That is something you have to do. I want to comment that out for a second. Notice that if we simply call the admin constructor, and we pass in all 3 of these credentials, including the last one, which is permission level. Notice that we're setting this permission level to be permission level, but if we didn't call this line at line 26, it wouldn't have just innately called this up here, okay? That has to be done explicitly. So with this being commented out here at line 26, let's refresh, and we don't get anything, okay? So what we were trying to do basically is we were trying to call get type and return this.type, but it never got set. Okay, so that's why we have to do this. Okay, so let's do something else. I mean, technically, why do I need to set the type to be admin when we started a class from a class called admin? I mean, why do we even need that at all? And I would say that we don't. Okay, so let's get rid of that altogether. And let's go over here and With this guy right here, we will get rid of type. Okay, so we'll get rid of that, get rid of this. In fact, I'm even going to get rid of it right here. I'm going to actually cut that out, and I'm going to put it down here. And the type by default for this admin class is going to be admin. Okay, so I want you to notice that we're making some members up here, name and email. We're making some members down here. When we start our admin class, it gets started by calling its constructor. We're going to pass a name, email, and permission level, which is going to pass up name and email up to the parents constructor, and it's going to set the permission level. But notice that over here in our code, we don't pass in type anywhere because the admin class, it makes a type and sets it by default to admin. So that's not something we have to pass in anymore. Okay, but then notice how we can say get type, which is going to first go over here and look for a method called get type. It doesn't exist, so it bounces up here. And this says return this type. Okay, so now let's go and run it and see what happens. Okay, we get admin. So the way you have to think of classes is that it's kind of like both of these two guys are blended together in a sense. And that's because with the admin class, we're extending the user class. So it extends all of this functionality just as if all of this functionality were kind of copied and pasted down here. But it also gives us this ability to override things. So if we have a method that we want to belong to the user class, such as get type, we can put it up here. But if we want to override it, we can duplicate that functionality down here, and this is the one that gets used. Remember when we did that? We have this one up here, which is going to return admin. See, we call get type, and this will return admin, as you saw here. But if we wanted to do something like return hello from, and then it's going to say hello from admin. Okay, so if we refresh, now we get hello from admin, and notice that it doesn't actually call this one up here. Just to kind of prove that even further, I'll just return foobar, just so you can see that that absolutely does not get called. Okay, so what if we wanted to have it call this one and then call this one at some point? Okay, we can do that. Right here we can say, well, let's just go up here and kind of return this back to that. We could, for instance, say return hello from, and we could do this, or rather we could do parent get type. Okay, so we can do that, and now when we call user1 get type, that will look here, it'll see this one, and then this one will say hello from, and it will call the parents get type, which returns the type. Okay, so let's do that, and it works. Okay, so now that we have that, let's actually copy this right here and make another one called member. So it's going to be class member extends user. So now we have member extending the user and admin extending to the user. Okay, so right here we don't have permission level anymore. Remember what we had? We had what, date added or something like that. And the type is going to be member. And the constructor, we're going to pass in the name and the email, and we're going to do the date added. So then we're going to call the parents constructor for name and email, and then we're going to say this date. You know what? I probably do this camel case, right? This date added equals whatever gets passed in. Okay, so now we have our constructor set up, and we can say hello from. You know, I'm just gonna get rid of this altogether. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. We're going to save this, go over here, we're going to say our user1 equals new member. And we're going to pass in a name, an email, but over here we're going to pass in a date. I'm just going to pass in something like this. Okay, so we're just passing in the string. I'm not worried about certain date formatting right now. And we're going to echo user1 get type. Okay, so let's go and look at where get type is. Notice this is a member object now. So if we go over here, the member object doesn't have a get type, but it extends the user. So let's go all the way up here, and the user has get type. So it's going to return the word member to us. Okay, so let's refresh this. Hopefully it works. Okay, so we get member. But I want you to notice that, let's say that's our user 1. Let's make user 2 is a new admin, and we'll say that this is Danny. And remember, for administrators, we don't pass in the date, we pass in their permission level, right? Okay, so let's do that. And we're going to echo user to get type. Okay, so a couple key things are going on here. For one, we have two users now, user 1 and user 2. User 1 is a member user, and user 2 is an admin user. So technically they're two different objects, but both the member and the admin user extend the user class. So remember how the user class is where we have get type, but then the admin class also has get type. And we can say this is an admin with a type of, and then it's going to say admin. This is an admin with a type of, and then it's going to say admin. But notice that the member class doesn't have get type, so that's going to just kind of default up to this one. So what we're going to get is we're going to get our first echo is going to be the word member, and our second echo is going to be, what did I say? It was this is an admin with a type of ... admin. Okay, and I'm going to put a couple break lines in here just so we can see that there's a space between them. Okay, so the significance of extending, having one class extend another, is that in this case, if you had this type of situation where you had two different types of users, admin and members, what you might find yourself doing is repeating code. You might find yourself doing some stuff in here for admin and doing the same stuff down here for member. So the way that we build our objects is we decide anything that is common between the two of them, let's have them both extend that class. Okay, so like another example might be if you had a vehicle inventory system, you might make a base class called vehicle and then have a class called like car extends vehicle. And any attributes or characteristics of vehicles, all vehicles, would go up into the vehicles class, and anything that's specific to cars would go into the cars class. And then you might have another class called truck or something, motorcycle or something like that, that extends vehicle. So this extending concept allows us a lot of modularity and flexibility, and is sometimes referred to as inheritance. In other words, this admin object is inheriting functionality from this user object up here. So that is my lesson on very, very basic object-oriented programming, and we learned about inheritance and we learned about polymorphism. And so I'll probably do some more videos kind of taking it from this step forward, but this is my first, and I look forward to seeing you again. Have a good night.